So there are times when you get to a certain part of your story where you're going to come across a dead end and you're going to need to try and find out more information. So if you're fighting or you come across a random character and you might need to interrogate that person in order to get some more information. My name is Don. I'm trying to be the sly strategist, and let's go ahead and get into it. Now, I did at this point just want to give a quick warning that I will be talking about coercion and intimidation, but I have absolutely no intention of getting into any physical violence. This is just, if anybody might be concerned about that, then let you know at the beginning of the video that it is going to be coming up. And I do hope you listen to it, but if you don't, I totally understand. And if that's the case, then you have a good day. So, as mentioned, you might get to a point in the story where you just need to find some information. That is the only way that you can move forward. You can just go ahead and kind of do a trade of information, once again, very transactional. But if you want to role play it out, I'd like to give you some creative ideas on how you can do that. Let's just start with some very, very simple things that you can do and need to take into consideration when you're starting an interrogation. Number one is you need to recognize what scene you're in. Are you in a ballroom in the middle of a big party and you have to be very circumspect in how you're going to interrogate that creature? Are you in a dungeon and it's the only surviving creature of its party? Are you in a jailhouse and you're at the cell of a prisoner and you're interrogating that prisoner there? These are all things that you need to keep in mind in order to determine which way you'd like to approach how you're going to interrogate that character or those creatures. You also want to establish kind of your motivation and what you precisely want to know. Do you want to know the location of the BBEG, the big bad evil guy? Do you just want to know where a specific treasure is or where the next lead in your investigation might be? These are things you need to keep in mind when you're thinking about what is motivating this interrogation. You need a lead, but it's a lot more helpful if you specifically know what leads you need. Maybe you need a map. Maybe you don't need any information whatsoever, but you're looking for a physical thing. These are all things you need to keep in mind. The next would be to choose your approach. If you are going to be kind of interrogating an NPC, but we'll go to that other thing that we talked about before, in the middle of a ballroom with a party with tons of nobles and folk all around you, doing the coercion might not be the best way to go. You might want to do someone who maybe has a hobnobber skill or work on charm or do these type of things, make an impression. Group impression are things that you could do when you're in a ballroom. Whereas if you're in a prison type situation where you're interrogating someone in prison, it's a little bit easier because it is a confined environment. So you could just do a straight intimidation or you could do a coercion. Those are the things you need to keep in mind when you're deciding exactly what your approach is going to be. The next thing I'd like to talk about is being creative in the role play. I don't want to sit there and make it sound like, oh, intimidating people is fun. However, you're playing a role-playing game, so why not try to have a little fun with it? There are various things that you can do, and I'm going to cover some skills, spells, and feats that you can use. It'll all be lower level and mainly from the core rulebook. But there are things like you could do to make it more flavorful, like cast and enlarge on yourself in order to make yourself bigger just for that situation to be more intimidating. You can do a good cop, bad cop type thing where you have one character who's like, whoa, 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 I know this guy is kind of going crazy on you, but I'll tell you what, I'm your friend. You could mess with a person's memory or mess with their perception and disguise yourself as someone you may know or someone of their own ancestry. These are all the different things that you could possibly do. And then the last thing I would say is don't be afraid to fail in the interrogation. If you are playing a long-term campaign and you need this piece of information in order to proceed in the story, I would seriously doubt that if you happen to fail this interrogation against this one thing, that your GM is going to end the story right there and be like, well, we had a good run. You will have other opportunities to find other leads in order to progress the story. So if this doesn't work out, doing nuclear options, or really getting really frustrated because you can't get this character to break, a lot of times it can be down to luck. It could be down to die rolls. He could have a very high saving throws. There's various things that could happen. And once again, remember, we're playing a game that is dependent on the roll of the dice. So if you roll badly or he rolls well, you're just not going to get the information this time, but there will be other opportunities. Some other things to keep in mind is you can use your character's skills, their abilities, their actions. These are all things. And once again, we're going to cover a few here in a little bit on what you can do in various situations. So keep the things that you have in mind. And maybe when you're doing your daily preparations, you can sit there and think about, well, I know we're going to be talking to that guy today, or that girl today, or that fae today. And this might be a good time to go ahead and tuck these spells into your spell book before you go. You need to also be aware of what is motivating the NPC. Are they scared of the boss and afraid that they are going to be held liable for any information they may give you? Maybe the boss's powers are way worse than anything you can do to them. So an intimidation isn't really going to work on them. There are things that can also further make them less likely to tell you. Maybe it's a member of their family. Maybe it's someone they grew up with. So try to think about what their motivations are, and that might alter your approach on how you would do an interrogation. Next thing I could say is be patient. You need to be patient with what you're doing, unless, once again, you're not necessarily role-playing this. It's more a transactional exchange of information based solely on dice rolls. But if you're role-playing it, be patient with it. Try different approaches. You can start with the bad cop and do the intimidation. And if your intimidation isn't working, then have someone come in with make an impression or charm or something along those lines in order to try and go the good cop way. So think about what you want, be persistent in it, and eventually you're going to get the information you need, whether from this particular creature or group of creatures that you're interrogating, or further down the line with another hint or clue. And the last thing I would like to say is, once again, it's weird to say this when you're talking about interrogating someone, but this is role playing. So have fun with it. Come up with things that you think are creative approaches simply because you're playing for the role playing love of the game, I guess. And you know what? Maybe if you do a really good job and come across something that will really get that information out in a creative way, you might get a hero point out of it. So you never know. So now that we've covered kind of your motivations and some tips on how to role play an interrogation, I'm going to go ahead and cover some of the spells, some of the skills, and some of the feats that a lot of characters have that you can use in order to try to get information in a variety of ways, in a variety of situations. So one of the first things I'd like to cover are kind of some utility abilities. In other words, these abilities would work across a broad range of situations and aren't necessarily specific to a particular case. There are certain things like there's spell level 4 called Discern Lies. Discern Lies does what it says. It allows you to find falsehoods that someone is trying to tell you as they're going. You basically get a +4 status boost to your perception checks when someone is trying to lie to you. You could do Charming Liar, which makes you a better liar and basically works along with your diplomacy and make an impression in order to assist in that. If you're coming across a creature, let's say you are trying to interrogate a kobold and you don't have anybody in your party who speaks Draconic and that's the only thing they're speaking in, there is a spell level 2 called Comprehend Language that you can use in order to assist in that particular interrogation. There's also the good for everything kind of thing, which is the Charm spell, which is a spell level 1. It will basically last for about an hour. It works on one creature and it will assist you in giving you a leg up on trying to get things from the creature because their hostility will be lowered towards you. There's also some other things that you can do that may not even require conversation whatsoever, such as there's a mind reading, which is a spell level 3, and it is something that allows you to discern surface thoughts on the top of the creature's mind. So you could ask it a question, and even if it's not answering you, you might be able to get a vague sense of yes or no, or maybe their feelings about the subject that you are questioning them about. You can also use a spell called Modify Memory, which is a 4th level spell. Modify Memory would allow you to possibly adjust their memory so that maybe for a brief period of time, they think that you were someone they grew up with, or they think they know you, and or maybe think that you're part of the group that they are part of and might feel more comfortable telling you these things. There is another one called Veil, which I think is kind of interesting and could be an interesting approach. It's a 4th level spell, and you could cast a veil upon your party. Once again, we'll go back to that kobold. All of a sudden, you could kind of make him think that all of you are kobolds, and therefore he might give you more information than he would if he thought you were the adventuring party, and he might discuss the things that they are working on, or she might just start talking about the plan, saying, well, the boss said we need to get this X thing done before this Y thing time. So Veil is an interesting approach that you could do, but these are utility spells that you can use kind of to assist you in a lot of different ways and a lot of these different things we're going to be talking about next. Now, the first things I would like to discuss are coercion abilities that you have. There is obviously the coerce skill that you have that allows you to basically bully a character in order to give you information. It's precisely what this one is for. There is also a group coercion that you can use in order to try to interrogate a group. Let's say maybe you're interrogating a group of school children who aren't, that sounds bad, but a group of school children who aren't giving you the information you need, or some mine workers that are being not forthcoming towards you. You could try a group coercion. And once again, there are things you can do to be a little bit creative. I mentioned a little bit earlier, but there's a 2nd level spell called Enlarge that you could do in order to physically make yourself bigger. It might not be to do what the spell's intent is for, but it does make you a large creature, which is physically more imposing. And once again, remember, I'm talking about the role play of the situation, not necessarily the dice rolls. So now let's talk about that ballroom situation where we had a party going on and there's a bunch of people around and you can't necessarily go after one person. There are specific things you could do, like make an impression, which allows you to improve a target's attitude towards you, or a group impression, which allows you to do it for more particular creatures or people. And both of those would work off your diplomacy. There's also an interesting spell called Glibness, which basically says that falsehoods pass through your lips as smoothly as silk. And these would be things in order to try to ingratiate yourself with a particular character. There is also a society skill called Connections, and it's a feat, 2nd level, that you can use to trade favors or to potentially meet important people that might be pertinent to your particular case. There is also another 2nd level feat called Glad Hand, requiring an expert in diplomacy that as soon as you meet someone, you can immediately attempt a diplomacy check to make an impression rather than having to wait that minute that you normally would. These are all little things that you could do during a social situation that doesn't require you to really hone in on a single person. And the last one I'd like to talk about are combat abilities. Now, these are things that you could do either during combat or after combat is over. And I'll get to that last after combat is over in a second here. There is a focus spell called Commanding Lash that requires you to have made a successful attack. And in that case, you can basically almost coerce the creature with a threat of more strikes, more harm, and you can issue basically a command to the target. This would be kind of up to the GM's interpretation of whether you could command, tell me where the big boss is. I don't know. It depends. But once again, I'm talking about the role playing side, not necessarily the mechanics. Another one that you could use is during combat. There's a second level spell that's kind of interesting called Calm Emotions, which basically takes the hostility out of the situation. And if the creatures fail their basically saving throws, then they can't perform hostile actions. It'll be canceled if someone performs a hostile action on them. So maybe this would be something you need to speak about beforehand. But you could kind of calm the combat out and then work on things like the group impression, things along those lines. This would have to be something that you could work with your DM and see if he'd allow you to do it. I know as a GM, I would 100% allow this just for the creativity out of it. And then the last ability I'd kind of like to talk about, and this is more for after the combat's over, is there is a fourth level spell called Talking Corpse, which kind of does what it does. It basically allows you to give a corpse a semblance of life, and you can speak to the corpse and have them answer your questions. So it is an interesting spell and something that you can use as a way to get more information. Now, I will say this was kind of a weird one to come up with a script for, but I really enjoyed covering the role playing for interrogations. Once again, I just want to stipulate that there are things that you can do. You have skills, you have feats, you have abilities, you have spells, you have all these things that you can do, and some of them directly relate to interrogation and some of them don't. So as a game master, or as your game master who you are working with, whoever he or she might be, and might just ask whether you can use it. Creative uses of ability, spells, skills, feats, in my mind, are fantastic. And I would 100% allow a lot of these as long as they can justify what the intended effect of these particular skills, feats, ability, spells would be. I do hope you learned something out of this. And I really, really hope that you got something new or a little twist on other ways to do something rather than just yell at a creature and hope he breaks. Because that doesn't always work in truth. And these ways might be a little bit more fun from the role playing angle side of it. So, with that, we'll go ahead and close out. I do hope you enjoyed it. I actually did enjoy this one quite well. If you did, feel free to like, subscribe, hit that notification bell. But regardless of whatever you do, I hope you have a great day and happy adventuring. Thanks.